Thank you. This work session is going to be on emergency preparedness and the Assembly's role in that process. We need to identify everybody for the record. Ernie, we'll start with you.
Yes. Ernie Hall, Assembly.
Mike Gutierrez, Assembly.
Chris Birch, Assembly.
Patrick Flynn, Assembly, and ICS trained PIO.
I'll be great for Assembly.
Training Assembly.
WOCM.
Paul Holman, Assembly, and also ICS training in many areas.
First aid certified. Here.
Jennifer Johnson, and I'm Woofer certified.
I'll turn the time over to administration.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to realize that we have so many assembly members that are certifiable. But I would have to admit, I'm also certified, so, and certifiable.
Join the crowd.
What we'd like to do today is basically do two things, accomplish two things. One is just to give you a real quick orientation regarding Office of Emergency Management and what they do. And then secondly, get into, in an emergency, with what the Assembly's roles are and some of the key things that we would be looking forward to from the Assembly in that regard. And then if you have any questions, anytime during the briefing, please chime in. With me is Kevin Spillers, and Kevin is our emergency manager, and Rob Finch, who also works in the Emergency Operations Center. And he'll hopefully be able to provide technical support for us. With that, Kevin?
Well, good morning. I think I've met most of you, not all of you, but by way of background, I'm relatively new to Anchorage. I've been here since 2008. I'm a retired military guy, 31 years in the Marines. Started working for the municipality, tail end of the Baggage Administration, and then transitioned over with this administration. So I've been here coming up on 2 years in December. Okay. Wait for the slides to pop up.
Paul, do you have a question you want to ask now, or do you want to wait till the end?
No.
You'll wait? Okay. Keep going, sorry.
Well, Mr. Spillers, I do appreciate your documenting the issue of how to get off Government Hill when the bridges closed last year, so thank you for that.
Now just out Eagle River.
Okay, next slide here. Oops. Still warming up.
Can you just talk us through it?
Why don't you go ahead
Yeah,
and
I'll
talk
go-
us through it? They all have handouts.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do that. I'll start that. Yeah, if you look at the topics we're going to talk about, what I'd just like to give you a little overview on our core services and our missions. Talk to you a little bit about the difference between the Office of Emergency Management, the Emergency Operations Center. Talk to you a little bit about our personnel and staffing and the EOC Activation Authority. Tell you a little bit about the facility itself and its capabilities. And then we'll talk to you a little bit about emergencies and response, and then the emergency operations plan. The funding sources in our budget, we'll touch on that briefly because that's going to be covered in more detail next week with later with the budget conversations. We'll tell you a little bit about the training we do, and then some of the community outreach things we do, and then more specifically about the Assembly's role during an emergency, which is what you asked for. Our core services here, if you think of the OEM as we're basically, but not exclusively involved in emergency planning activities, that's the EOP and some of the other plans we do. We're also involved in community outreach. The EOC, when it's activated, is really the lead agency for emergency response and coordination activities. So there is a difference between the two of us. Next slide. If you look at our mission statements, whereas the OEM is predominantly involved in planning, the EOC is a response organization, and the OEM is absorbed by the EOC when the EOC is activated. So a lot of times we hear the word EOC, it's really a facility until it's activated, then it's an agency. For the OEM, there's 5 of us there, 1 part-time. Myself, Rob Finch, we're both execs. The plans and policies position is currently vacant. The young lady was filling that, left for maternity leave, and she doesn't plan on returning at this point. We have our grants and budget manager, Craig Fenderman, who's been with municipality for a while. He's non-rep, as is Nikki Stocco, the senior office associate. Community preparedness manager, Dawn Brantley, she's an exec, a part-time position. Next slide. The EOC, when you look at it, we're about 50 folks, 3 different teams, 50 folks in each team. organized around the Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. I realize some of you have been here for a while and you remember the old red, white, and blue team, very similar Alpha, Bravo, Charlie teams, about 50 folks. We would, if they're activated, we'd work in 2 12-hour shifts, and we've got that third team to help flush out the bench or backfill as required. We can also task organize for a crisis action team for a specific emergency as required. Also houses our 211 call center, and that's a United Way agency, social service agency that's in the basement, and they act as the call center for the emergency operations center should there be an activation.
One thing on that, on the day-to-day operation, it's basically a grant-funded position. United Way oversees it, and that's the agency that pretty much provides information to folks that call into that number about social service type of agencies that's available for help, whether it's housing, food, medical, etc. And they're extremely busy during the day. And if we did activate the Emergency Operations Center and either form the CAT team, Crisis Action Team, or the full activation, these folks are the ones that would take the calls in from the public and provide them with information regarding the situation and provide any type of verbal assistance that they could. So it's really a good partnership that's dual rolled for us.
This slide here, that's the EOC's organizational chart when activated. If you look at it there, that gives you an idea of the categories or functional areas that we're organized around and what those individual functions would be underneath there. So I won't go through each and every one of them, but it gives you a pretty good overview and perspective of how we're organized. We've recently realigned and reorganized, and that was due to some turnover, reorganization within the city structure itself. And we wanted to make sure that we had some key agencies that weren't previously represented in there, that we incorporated them in, and that we had the right subject matter experts in there to deal with an emergency. So like I say, it's recently reorganized, and we think this is a better fit for us. We've been working with it over about the last year, and we've had good results, and we're happy with the direction it's gone.
And just to add on to that, if you look at this organization, especially those of you that have at least gone through the ICS certification, you'll see that this follows NIMS, the National Incident Management System, which we are required to do in order to receive any federal assistance or federal funding. And part of that, of course, is the Incident Command System as well. So this structure does follow that.
There's your floor plan, and like I said, I just show you that because some of you might remember it looking differently, and those who've been with the city for a long time, it's had different variations, but that's the current variation, and like I said, we've arranged that to be more functional with the current personnel reorganization in there. So that gives you an idea of what it looks like. Next slide. A little bit about the activation authority. The folks here are the ones that would activate the Emergency Operations Center. It usually, or I can't imagine a situation in which only one individual would be in the loop. Usually when there is an activation, there would be, all these folks would be in the loop if it's gotten to that point. Next slide. Facility itself, where it's located, I think most people know where it's located. Within the facility, it's backup emergency power capability. We also house the police and fire dispatch backup centers, and then as we discussed, the United Way 211 call center in the basement. Slide. These are just some internal or interior shots of it. They don't show up really well here. They're on your slides there. I'll just sort of go through those. But once again, it gives you an idea of what the inside looks like. That's actually fire dispatch. The fire dispatch and police dispatch are actually two little different rooms in the basement down there, but that's a current view of the fire dispatch. And next slide. That's the 211 call center. Some of you may recall there was a large open area down there where we've constructed a wall and provided security for the 211 call center, and this is the area they operate out of now. So that if you were to go into the Emergency Operations Center, anybody involved in a response is behind a cipher locked door now. So public access in and out of the facility, those don't mix directly with those involved in a response. So it gives us a little more control and security. Next slide. A little bit about our communications capability. I won't go down each and every one of these, but a couple things I will bring out. A lot of you remember the amateur radio or air raid service. They're still housed in the basement there. That's still an important piece. We still have direct contact with the National Guard and the mayor. We just pick up the bat phone, as we call it. We can contact them directly. We're plugged into the emergency alert system, the internet. We still have that, and other capabilities we still have are the handheld radios, sat phones, and we still maintain that base stations for VHF and UHF.
One thing on the amateur radio services, obviously, as was indicated, they are located and they have a station at the EOC, but upon an emergency, they have deployment locations where they would go. For example, the police station, the fire station, and some of our other key facilities, so that we would have direct communications with them should something break down in the other types of communications that we have. So it's a redundancy for us. Also at the hospital.
Okay, next slide. Emergency response. The reason this is important, or to put a label on things, or by putting a label on things, or if you were to characterize emergencies these three ways, what that does is it gives you an idea of what's going on within the city, particularly if you're a supporting agency. If they see, or in a sit rep, or we identify ourselves as being response operation level 3 there, they know that there's something very significant going on. Likewise, if you see a decreasing level of response, you know things are returning more to normal or they're becoming less severe. So the first one there, the low level evolving, that's pretty much the day-to-day operations. A lot of times, or most times, the OEM staff can handle the minor emergencies. It really things stay within the box, and that's pretty much how things operate day-to-day. However, there are occasions when things could get heightened. Sometimes a volcano alert, or it becomes an air quality issue, or similar kinds of events. Those are things we watch where we have a heightened awareness or alert status, and we're talking to other agencies, coordination agencies. The rapidly evolving level 1 to 2, this is something that occurs with minimal warning or has the potential to grow rapidly. These might be different things like large transportation accidents or two-alarm fires or hazmat spills, things along those lines. So this is where we bring in at least part of the EOC, and an energy emergency might be one of those where we activate with a CAT team or crisis action team. Then thirdly there, the spontaneous or catastrophic. This is something like an earthquake would occur with little or no warning. We expect or anticipate significant damage, or there is an incident that occurs where there is significant damage. This is where we go to the full activation mode.
And on the crisis action teams, the way that works is, again, it's not a big significant issue that you're dealing with, but you tailor the crisis action team to whatever the situation is. Whether it's an avalanche that cuts off, for example, Girdwood, you could activate a crisis action team to deal with that particular issue, as opposed to the full activation of 3 shifts of 50 people each shift. So the crisis action team can be anywhere from 3 to 10 or 12 people, depending on the experts that you need to handle that particular situation. And we have several crisis action teams developed for certain type of things. And then let me just give you an example. When we talk about day-to-day operations, level 1, we have an apartment fire, middle of the night. People have to be evacuated, we have to shelter them. Well, that's something that OEM could handle by themselves routinely in conjunction with the Red Cross. So they basically, we would determine what shelter to open up, we would not contact the Red Cross. The Red Cross, OEM, and the health department would basically establish the shelter. And normally what we use is, for these type of things, small duration and not a large number of folks, we usually use our rec centers for that. But that's just an example of where OEM would not have to activate, but they could do that routinely by contacting the various agencies and make it happen.
Sure. Okay, next slide. Talk to you a little bit here about the emergency operations plan. This is essentially a collection of plans and addresses the city's response to the hazards. It's currently under revision, and basically the revision process is a review of what the current federal and state guidelines are. Make sure we're current with that. We walk through the plans, we update them or revise them, make sure that they've got enough detail in them that we can mount an effective response. And then along with that, we're developing standard operating procedures for the EOC. This is something that hasn't existed in the past, and basically this gives us guidelines on how to respond. Next slide. And this is an important piece to what we're doing over there. We're describing or defining more clearly what the roles of the EOC are, what the functions within the EOC are a better way to talk about it. It's still an all hazards approach consistent with National Instrument Management System, as George pointed out. The revision will also be more comprehensive. It's going to resolve some ambiguities and clearly define roles and responsibility. And then once again, this standard operating procedures that we're developing, it'll complement what the EOP does. Next slide. I'll touch briefly on this funding sources. We really have two funding streams, the area-wide 101 fund and then the grants. The EMPG grant and the LEPC grant there, those two are the ones that go towards pay or towards wages. The others there, under the SHSP, the MMRS, and the CCP, those buy gear, equipment, and training for us. So if you were to look at our budget, its fluctuations have more to do with the amount of grants we're getting and not so much how we're staffed or what we're getting in payroll. That stays relatively constant. It's the amount of grant money that we get for one thing or another, depending on what projects we're working on for the grants. And we'll be going into more detail on that when we go through the budget briefs later on. Next slide. EOC training events for 2010. I won't go through each and every one of these, but there are a couple things to note. Alaska Shield was a major exercise statewide with an earthquake. This occurred in April. This is where we did a full EOC manning. There was also boots on the ground for urban search and rescue and hazmat spill, where the police and fire played in this as well. So this was a significant event for us to help us exercise or get used to our revised EOC staffing and our functions. Likewise, we've recently, 14 October, we began addressing continuity of operations, working with the department heads to revise and update our continuity of operations plan. So we gave our first training in that, and that's a work in progress throughout. So we've developed a plan of action and milestones to update our COOP plan as well.
And just to elaborate on that, if I may, obviously, folks on a day-to-day basis are used to operating out of a particular area. Like folks in City Hall here are used to operating out of City Hall. But what if something happened and City Hall was not available to operate out of? So you gotta have a backup place for the folks in those departments to operate. And so part of the planning process calls for, well, what are the size of the needs necessary to be able to function? What is the equipment that you need on hand? Where best can you be located to interact with the other type of departments that you normally work with? And if, for some reason, computers are down, what materials do you need on hand to be able to fall in on and to be able to operate? In other words, stubby pencil. Because that could happen, and, heaven forbid, but it could happen. So that's the planning process. So we're in the process right now of developing those plans with every one of the departments, not just for City Hall, but every location that we have where we have department personnel, so that they have a backup location in which to operate out of. And the hopes would be that once we solidify the plan, that there will be kits developed, just like we used to have when I was here the last time, where the kit would be located on where you would fall in. And if you could not operate out of your current facility, you'd go to that new facility, and materials and everything that you need would be located there so that you get it out and start operating as soon as possible to provide the services necessary for the public.
The last one down there, the energy emergency tabletop, that just occurred last Thursday here, and it was very successful. We met all our training objectives, and we looked at an energy emergency over the course of an emergency. And this, as George is saying, touched on the COOP process as well, where if you had to disrupt City Hall here, for example, or other key places where essential functions are carried out, where would they go? But besides just municipality, there are other organizations and institutions that are affected as well. So this tabletop looked at that and looked at the implications of an energy emergency or a disruption of natural gas to a key piece of the city. We had 10 different agencies participating. It was attended by about 55, 60 different folks from these agencies. So It was very productive, very insightful. We're developing or putting together our after action on that. And like I said, we met all our training objectives. So we're really happy with the way the exercise turned out and the level of participation we've got.
We also had representation from Kenai, the Kenai Borough, as well as the Mat-Su Borough, and they participated in the exercise as well. It really was a good success. And, you know, last year when we did this energy exercise, we took it to a point where things were manageable. But it was more to basically get everybody used to working with each other and developing a plan, and then critiquing the plan once we developed it. We took it a step further this time. I mean, this was really a crisis mode. No gas, and no gas for about almost half the population of the city. And so what do? And it just so happened that that area was the area where your hospitals, a lot of your schools, an awful lot of your headquarters facilities for different agencies, as well as private sector organizations were located. And so it did create quite a challenge for folks to come up with solutions. And once we've identified those solutions and what has to be done, then that's incorporated in the plan, further revising the plan. So plans are always ongoing and they're further being revised. That's just the nature of planning. It's the nature of exercises. Because there's no one plan that can take care of everything. And so the more you exercise plans and the more you exercise people, the more knowledgeable you become and the quicker you are to react to whatever the situation is. Because, geez, you know, we had something similar to this some time ago that we practiced. Hey, that applies here too. So that's kind of how it works. And you have to do it all the time. All the time.
Next slide. For 2011, we'll be working the next couple of weeks developing a more specific schedule. But these are the training areas or areas that we're going to focus on for our 2011. And like I say, these are things we've hit in the past, but as George pointed out, the more you look at these things, you learn something new each time. You change the format of the exercise and you discover other scenes. So the more you do it, the better you're going to get, the more you discover, the more things you didn't realize were involved in it, and the more organizations and agencies get to play as well. Slide. Talk to you a little bit here about community outreach and education, and this would be one of our direct services, be a good way to characterize it. We do a lot of community educational presentations. I don't think we've ever turned anybody down that asked for one. So that works out well, and we actually stay pretty busy on this. Dawn Brantley is our community outreach coordinator. Although she's part-time, she stays very busy with this, and this has been a very successful program for us. We talk with community councils, different civic groups, and businesses and other organizations. Slide. We also do the annual Safe and Sound Fair. Some of you may have attended that. This is the third time we did it. Over 2,000 folks attended. Along with that, we had the elementary emergency preparedness poster contest. That was a big hit. And then the Who's Your Hero contest as well, where local heroes were nominated, and there were three folks nominated on that. And we presented the award to those folks. Chief Mew actually presented the award to those folks at the Emergency Preparedness Fair. It was held September 11th of this year, and like I say, it's grown every year. It's been a big hit for us. Slide. We also recently, within the last couple of weeks, maybe some of you attended this as well, the Pet Emergency Preparedness Day in conjunction with the animal shelter. So we all know how important care of pets is during an emergency, particularly in evacuations or other situations. So we also focus on the pet owner and helping them get prepared as well. Slide. Our Emergency Watch program is also a big hit. Some of you might be familiar with this, or some of your folks in your community councils may be involved in this. Next slide. Really what it is, it expands our reach or our outreach efforts and education efforts. It prepares neighborhoods and reduces the strain on city services and improves individual neighborhood resilience in the time of a disaster. It's basically a volunteer, led by a volunteer, a neighborhood leader, and they get education, emergency preparedness, and planning. They get training in communications, first aid, damage assessment, and resource management. And then they do an annual exercise. So, like I say, I think there's about a dozen of them, and they at this point, and they sort of go up and down in level of activity over the years. Some are more active at other times than others. And so this, once again, this is that resiliency, building that resiliency in the community that's really helpful or part of our direct services. Next slide. Assembly's role in emergency. And what I'd like to talk to you here is really two things. There's what the charter says and the municipal code. Now, I know a lot of you have been around a long time and already know this, but this is just to give you an overview of what it is or by comparison. We'll talk a little bit about definitions and authorities. And once again, I'm not going to read the slides here because I know a lot of you are already familiar with this, but I'll just touch on what the important points are. Next slide. If we talk about the Anchorage Charter here, I put this slide up here, emergency. This is what they're talking about. What do you have to have in order to have an emergency? How do we know it's an emergency? And here's a definition that works or fits that, or at least part of a definition. Next slide. Likewise, now we're into, well, okay, so what does that mean to you as an assembly member? Well, what it really means here, the assembly's role would be an ordinance, an emergency ordinance adopted, and you can adopt an emergency ordinance. It would tells you right there what it would take to pass that. And this emergency ordinance, if it meets the criteria, mayor can veto it up to within 36 hours, and it's effective for 60 days unless you meet to pass another ordinance where you no longer declare it as an emergency, or you can extend the ordinance out. So that's essentially what it's telling you right there, or one of your key roles there is an emergency ordinance. Likewise, if you look at the Anchorage Municipal Code, it's a little more specific in terms of what it describes as an emergency. So if you're looking, how bad is this situation? Does the assembly need to take action? This gives you a little more guidance on that and helps sort of clarify or qualify what it means to have an emergency. They talk about civil disorder here. Obviously, that is an emergency. If you go to the next slide, it gives you a better description of what we classically or traditionally think as emergencies that are of non-civil disturbance type. So it gives you, once again, if you're an assembly person and thinking, how do we know if we should be, pass an ordinance or not, or address an ordinance, this helps give you some qualifications to that. Next slide. Once again, your authority here, you in this case, or by municipal code, that you can declare an emergency no longer exists, or once again, you can declare or extend the length of a emergency declaration. So really, those are the two roles: is introducing an ordinance, or extending an ordinance, or declaring that there's no longer an ordinance. And between the charter and the municipal code, those things seem to be consistent, and that pretty much would describe your role and what goes into it. There are other things about emergencies in both these things, but specifically about the assembly's role, those are the big items there. Next slide. Once again, this is that termination of emergency proclamation, declaring that an emergency no longer exists, or extending it.
So to put everything in context, there's two ways in which an emergency declaration can basically occur. Probably the way that it would most likely unfold would be the mayor. The mayor, through a proclamation, would declare that there's an emergency. That is good for 48 hours. If it needs to be extended, you, the body, the legislative body, needs to extend it. And you can extend it up to, I believe it's 60 more. And then it can be extended after that. If, on the other hand, a declaration is determined and a proclamation is made by the mayor, the assembly may, for whatever reason, decide that it really doesn't warrant an emergency declaration. And so you, through the majority vote, would basically terminate that declaration or proclamation. Now, why is the proclamation or declaration important? Because once the declaration is made and goes to the state, the clock starts ticking as far as being able to be reimbursed through state funds for services provided during this particular emergency. And what's important about that? If the emergency level is very severe, then at that point in time, once the governor gets that emergency proclamation or declaration, then the governor can also declare a state of emergency or declaration and specifically pinpoint Anchorage or the South Central region or whatever. That goes to the federal government. What's important about that is that sets the groundwork for the president to declare an emergency in Anchorage, Alaska, which sets us up for FEMA funding for reimbursement of those expenses that we have incurred. It also sets up several other things. It sets up the federal system of support, i.e. the military, because with that, the military can render assistance. Now, quite frankly, also under the law, the military can also render assistance if in the commander's mind, the military commander who is senior at the site determines that if he does not render assistance right away, then life and limb are in jeopardy. So if it's a life and limb situation, then the local commander can, without the federal jurisdiction governing it, declare some type of assistance to us and provide it. Typically, it doesn't happen that way. Typically, the federal mandate allows it. The other thing that comes when the state enters into the fray is it opens up not only money from the state, but it also opens up the ability to use the National Guard to come in and to assist with whatever resources they have to bear. Now, so the mayor has the authority to basically do a proclamation. The assembly has the authority to do a declaration. The assembly and the mayor together can extend that for whatever period of time is necessary to solve the problem. And like was reiterated, the assembly also can terminate. It will automatically terminate when those deadlines come to be, whether it's a proclamation and or a declaration. But bottom line is, it is set in statute and in code. So that's kind of where your role is. You know, your appropriations role, emergency procedure roles, and all of these things, you know, prevail. But the other key thing about the mayor determining a proclamation or you determining a declaration is that allows certain things to happen internally. It does allow, for example, curfews. It does allow for massive evacuation. So under these circumstances, the mayor has very, very broad powers, or the acting mayor has very broad powers to be able to enact things and make things happen for the protection of life, limb, and property. So, you know, that's kind of the bottom line, and so your role would be there to basically extend or declare and appropriate as necessary, and all the other things that you do as you do today. So, what are your questions?
We have
Please
lots of
read.
questions for you. Paul, you're
Great.
first.
Well, first of all, thanks for the presentation, and to Mr. Spillers, I know that you've been at the Public Safety Committee meeting for the Assembly, and as I've given reports, we're expanding, making sure that it's not just police and fire, Public Safety Committee, the Health Department with their public health response for emergencies and such. So it's really good to see the particularly expanded version for the presentation. And I recognize trying to keep within an hour for us, sharing all the resources, I recognize limitations. The other thing I wanted to quickly comment is, as looking through the budget, I'm pleased to see the administration recognizes the fact that as its role in public safety, the Emergency Operations Management Program does not appear to reflect any cuts, if you will, in the budget, and I think that's a good sign that public safety is paramount important. We can plan and we can make as many exercises as possible, but when the real thing happens, we really need to have functioning systems and contingencies. So I appreciate that, and I'll pass for it.
Thank you. Elvie, are next, and then Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, and it's not that I didn't know it, but I'm really happy to be reinforced that, you know, our community is prepared in the event of an emergency. A couple of years ago, I went on a tour of the 211 call center, and if you don't mind, could you just tell us again what the purpose of it is, and what has the public's response been? Thank you.
Sure. It's day-to-day. It's day-to-day operations. It actually functions as a social service agency. If somebody has a problem, and it actually is statewide. It's not just for Anchorage. It's actually statewide. So they provide the social service referral service, and statewide. Should there be an emergency here in Anchorage, what they have the capability of doing is that social service referral function, they can actually get picked up by somebody elsewhere in the country, and then they activate and become our call center. And what they do is they take calls from the public and become that, they work under the cognizance of the public information folks. People call with questions, they provide that rumor control aspect. Where do I go? Where do I take my pet? Or where are the pet shelters? So we develop talking points for them. So when people call in, they've got a ready list of information that they can pass. So they're basically there to reassure the public, help in that information chain. They can, like I say, basically give them social service disaster referral kinds of information. They're activated, when they do get activated with agreement with United Way, the city requests their service and then they respond. We can expand that call center service. We all have facilities down there. If we have to go, if the disasters are broad enough, where we can augment it with other volunteers that would work under them as well. But essentially, it's that information or connection with the public in a time of a disaster. They perform that function, and then their day-to-day function, once again, is that social service referral agency.
That organization is grant funded through United Way. And the organization itself on a day-to-day basis, of course, handles quite a few calls of the social nature. But with our agreement with United Way, if in fact there was an emergency, then they would come under our control, they would work for our public affairs folks, and they would be augmented with volunteers. Because obviously, if we were to run 2 shifts, for 24 hours and then you go 7 days a week or however long it happens, they will need augmentation. So volunteers would be basically working with them to assist in the call taking and the passage of information to the public.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, I just, in case folks didn't know what it was all about, I wanted to.
We'd love to have you come back and take a look at it, where it is now and how they operate. So anybody, we'd welcome, encourage you to come by and see us at a time that works for you. We'd love to walk you through the EOC and everything that else goes on there, or attend one of our events or training events or something like that. So more than welcome anytime.
Thank you.
Debbie?
I've lived in Shugiak for over 30 years, and in those years, regularly at every single community council, there's been discussion and questions about what would happen if the Glen Highway shut down. Because of that, as you know, George, our community really lobbied heavily to get a separate EOC office in the Valley River Center. There was a thinking that our local groups would maybe be the only people available on hand. I know you didn't want to go with that route, but there was discussion about putting at least ancillary equipment out there in one of the fire stations. Has that occurred?
Well, thank
Twofold
you.
question. The second part is, have you specifically looked at that scenario in terms of emergency preparedness?
We have looked at,
Thank
let me answer the last question first, and then I'll go
Okay.
back to the first question. We have looked at that scenario. And basically what you have is you have 4 bridges that actually cross the river. You have the Glen Highway, you have the Memorial Drive Bridge as well, and then on Fort Richardson you also have 2 other bridges across. So you do have the wherewithal of getting across and providing support to Eagle River. Those have been practiced. In fact, when we did the exercise in April that was mentioned, Arctic Shield, we did in fact exercise that portion of it, that the bridges would have been used to basically convey supplies, material, emergency folks, etc., to Eagle River, and also if we had to evacuate them back into Anchorage. The other thing too is, remember, we also have mutual aid to our north with the Matsu Borough. So that's also a relief valve if for some reason we have difficulties supporting the Eagle River folks in a time of crisis. As far as the National Incident Management System works, you have one emergency operations center. And one of the things that maybe we should have done a better job of doing was to tell you what the role of that emergency operations center really, really is, and what it isn't, and how it fits into the incident command system. The Emergency Operations Center is a tool to do several things. One, monitor the situation, figure out exactly what the situation is, and develop a plan to allocate resources where necessary and prioritize them where necessary to handle whatever situation you're dealing with, or multiple situations there as it may occur. The incident commander is the senior person on the scene dealing with an incident. So we have a major incident in Eagle River. We have the fire department, the senior fire official there. If it's an earthquake or if it's a fire situation, an evacuation exercise, is the incident commander. Where does that person communicate to? The Emergency Operations Center. What does the Emergency Operations Center do? It realigns the resources to support that incident commander at that location. That's how the system works. You can have multiple incident commanders throughout the community. Eagle River, you could have a situation going on at Girdwood, you could have a situation happening in Midtown, South Anchorage, etc. You have incident commanders that's handling those situations, and the Emergency Operations Center, the single Emergency Operations Center, is allocating all those resources based on the priority of need. And the priority need is based on life, limb, protection of property, and then it goes down from there. So that's how the system works, and that's why, again, that all of our incident commanders have been trained through the NIMS system and incident command system. All of our shift directors, as well as the key personnel that would have anything to do with directing of resources. So that if we expend all of our resources, then we can also use, by law, the resources of the state and direct them, and the resources of the federal government and direct them. If you weren't incident command, if you didn't follow NIMS or the incident command system, we would not be able to do that. So that's why the system is set up the way it is.
Thanks, Debbie. Mike, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Flynn started the trend of people identifying their certification. I should have pointed out that I also am ICS certified. It's an interesting system. One of the things that, when you brought up authorities, I can recall a few years ago talking about public health, that one of the problems was the municipality did not have quarantine authority. Has that changed, or is it something that could be delegated to the mayor under the declaration of emergency? And where's that situation right now? And Diane Engel just walked in. Diane may want to.
Well, we've got Diane, and we also have the legal department behind us. And you want to address that question on quarantine, or you want to have Diane do it first?
Given the choice. Maybe you should ask.
Good timing,
her first.
Diane.
Keep in mind, we only have 13 minutes left for this discussion.
Well, when I play lawyer, my answer to that is that no, the city does not have quarantine authority. That resides with the state. We have neither quarantine nor isolation authority, and I assume you know there's a difference between the two. And there was some work done previously to talk about introducing an ordinance to give the mayor quarantine and or isolation authority, and depending on the administration's wishes, that would be something that we would have to look into again and work with the state about how their enabling legislation works to know if we could actually do that here. But at the present time, my understanding is that we don't have it, but we have looked about whether we should do that or not.
Also, Mr. Michaelis, you spoke about the COOP plan, and I recall discussions about, again, with regard to a public health emergency, perhaps the best place for people to fall out, as you put it, is their own home and stay at home. But there were some issues with that. Is that something you're looking at as well? Because again, in the case of a pandemic, probably the best place for people to be is away from other people.
Right. Every situation is different, and that's why you have all these different plans and annexes to plans to try to, at least have a plan in place to deal with those type of things. Typically, that's exactly right. If it was a pandemic, the only people you'd want around is those people that are exactly key and essential to make things happen. All the rest, you probably would want them to be home. So yes, there is one other thing that I think all of us have to be cognizant of, that human nature being what it is, if we had a major event, where are the first responders gonna go? Are they gonna stay home and take care of their family, or are they gonna show up on the scene? Now, I'm not asking that question in a derogatory manner. It's a real question, and it's a real live problem. If you look at what happened in New Orleans, where did they show up? They stayed at home and they took care of their families. Why? Because they did not feel that their families were gonna be adequately taken care of unless they were there to do it. So one of the things that we encourage and try to do through an education process is teach our employees what they can do before a disaster strikes to ensure that their families are well taken care of and can take care of themselves to a certain degree, so that the primary person that works for the city, responder, can show up to work and do what he has to do, or she has to do. So, and it's not just here, it's the school district, it's private enterprise, everything else. Human nature says, gosh, I gotta take care of my family. But if they feel confident that they've got plans and supplies in place where they can be relatively taken care of, or they have friends that have been designated to do some of those things for them, then there's more of a chance of them showing up for work. So that's the other kind of issue to deal with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just one more question. And I apologize, I haven't read the current iteration of the emergency operations plan. Does the plan contain any recognition of special needs in an emergency? For
Yes.
example, translators for non-English speaking residents?
Yes, it does. It also has special needs for those folks with disabilities. How do you transport them? Where do you transport them to? How are you gonna take care of them if you establish a shelter, et cetera? Yes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chris?
That's it.
I guess my question is, how have we managed with the transition to some of the new radio equipment, communications gear? I remember we were buying radios and a lot of communication gear, so we had a fully integrated communications grid with state, federal, and our local resources. Is that full on?
It's about 3/4 of the way through the transition, but right now you wouldn't notice the difference because one of the requirements are that the new radio systems have to be backwards compatible as well. So in other words, not only do they have to have the full range of capacity to talk to everybody else, but if you have the older system, they have to be basically backwards compatible so that you can talk to the older system too. Once we have the full integration in place, then the older system goes and the new system's in place, and we're there. We're communicating now with all the different agencies and have that capability.
As a follow-up to that, what role do cellular phones play in the, as far as our professional response team engagement in one of these emergencies?
It's one of the other tools in the toolbox, but remember, that cellular phone is only as good as the line that it eventually has to travel through. So that's why if you look at our radio system, we have the capability of, in the air, communications like a radio or like a telephone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ernie, you're next, then Pat.
Yes, I'm curious, what's the threshold where you actually become involved in an event? You mentioned earlier about an apartment fire and Red Cross. Can I assume that if I hear Red Cross is involved in an incident, that OEM has already been there?
Pretty much, absolutely, yes.
One of the things that, an example might be sheltering. There's a threshold where Red Cross can handle it themselves until it reaches about 5 households or about 23 to 25 folks. At that point, they come to us, or we're aware of it prior to that. But that's the point where we could step in, or it's most beneficial where we step in and can provide a temporary shelter for folks that might otherwise be displaced. Under that, the Red Cross tends to take care of it, or people go off, stay with friends, but Red Cross has the resources to be able to deal with that without coming to us and say, hey, I need a shelter to set people up in. At that threshold, that's where we begin to step in and set up places for folks.
In about the last year and 3 months, we have activated a shelter, I think 3 times.
Yeah, about 3 times.
3 times.
Is that all? Okay. Ernie, is that your last question?
Yes, thank you.
Pat?
Just a very simple one. Do we have a backup EOC?
We do. We have a number of them, actually. Precinct Library, Girdwood, the Eagle River Town Center, where's it? And Station 12.
Thank you very much. That's all.
If you look in 2011 and developing a plan to make 72-hour kits available so people know what they need to get for their families, because ultimately, the family's protection and security belongs to each individual. And they can't expect our police department, emergency first responders to take care of their emergency family problem. If they've got a 72-hour kit, that's all the food they need for their family for 72 hours, clothes, cold weather gear. There are organizations out there that have the list available. If the city would get involved in making that, I don't know if you do it now, but make it available to the public and run classes, if you would, where they can bring all the stuff in this public, that would help.
Yeah, and matter of fact, that's a good point. That's a lot of what we do, is to help people or train them or educate them in these toolkits. And what we shoot for is actually 5 days. And this is consistent with what the state and other states do as well. So we spend a fair amount of time actually doing that, educating people how to build the kit. At the Emergency Preparedness Fair, we had a little competition where they put together gear and stuff inside a little kit. So we actually, and we approach it at different levels, from school kids to parents to seniors to other people of any kind, disabled. Yeah, so that's a very good point. And it's one of those direct services we do provide, and provide the information for them as well. What would be involved in a kit. We also have that available online. We have people come by and talk to us, walk in, so to speak. Hey, what do I need if the volcano erupts? So we've got all kind of literature, information, and training and education on this whole process, and assistance in building and putting it together.
And one of our major
If
training
you could do it in
programs.
2011, I was looking at your chart for, if you could at least plan a 72-hour program, because I know my wife's rabid on this stuff. She's got kids everywhere, you know?
Okay, sure.
But if so many people
Uh-huh.
live from day to day, do you remember, George, a couple of years ago when there was a toilet paper emergency in Palmer? On the radio, they were saying because of supplies dwindling, Palmer cleared out in about half an hour on the shelves up there. And if people don't plan for an emergency, it becomes a Palmer.
That's a scary.
Oh, I do.
I don't remember that, but, okay.
Ellie remembers that they went crazy.
One of the things that I wanted to chime in on, the Citizen Corps grant that we get, the Citizen Corps training is primarily an awful lot of that, about what you do as a family member, what kind of kits you put together, et cetera. So that's also part of the training program that we run.
Well, thank you, guys.
There's also all kinds of brochures out there. The school district has a great brochure. The city produced a brochure a couple of years ago that explains all that stuff.
Well, thank you, we appreciate it. Any other questions from assembly members? Thank you for being here.